She was one of the most beloved women in the history of country music. A mother, a survivor, a legend. Naomi Judd had beaten a deadly disease, fought through decades of personal pain, and somehow always managed to walk back into the spotlight with that famous smile on her face. But on the morning of April 30th, 2022, everything ended, and what was discovered afterward left the entire world completely speechless. The autopsy report that followed her death didn't just confirm what happened. It revealed deeply disturbing details about her final moments, the condition of her body, and a handwritten note found nearby that reportedly pointed a finger directly at her own daughter. This is the story the cameras never fully told. And once you hear it, you will never look at the Judd legacy the same way again. To truly understand what that autopsy revealed and why it matters so much, you first have to understand who Naomi Judd really was beneath all the glitter and applause. She was born Diana Ellen Judd in 1946 in a small town in Kentucky. Life was not easy for her growing up. She came from a modest background and had to work hard for everything she ever got. Before she was ever a star, she was a nurse in Nashville, a regular woman working long hours and raising her daughters largely on her own. It was only when she and her older daughter, Wynonna, began singing together that the world finally took notice. Their voices had a kind of magic that is almost impossible to describe. Naomi brought warmth. Wynonna brought raw power. Together, they created something that felt deeply real and deeply emotional at the same time. They called themselves the Judds. And almost from the moment they stepped onto a stage, they were unstoppable. Through the 1980s and into the 1990s, they released hit after hit. Songs like Mama He's Crazy, Why Not Me, and Grandpa Tell Me About the Good Old Days weren't just popular songs. They were songs that people held close to their hearts. Songs about family, about struggle, about love that doesn't give up. Over the course of their career together, they sold more than 20 million records, won 5 Grammy Awards, and had over a dozen #1 singles on the country charts. To the public, they were the perfect picture of what family and success looked like together. But here is where the story gets complicated, because that perfect picture was never fully real. Behind closed doors, the Judd family was dealing with tension, emotional pain, and secrets that most fans had absolutely no idea about. Naomi and Wynonna had a relationship that was intense in every possible way. They loved each other, yes, but they also fought hard, went through long stretches of silence, and often struggled to be in the same room without the old wounds reopening. On top of that, Naomi's younger daughter, actress Ashley Judd, has spoken publicly about growing up in what she described as an emotionally unstable and chaotic household. Ashley once said she was left alone at a young age, and that the home environment was far from the peaceful family image that was shown to the world. These were not rumors. They were things the family confirmed themselves through interviews and books. And at the center of all of it was Naomi, a woman who smiled for millions of fans while quietly falling apart behind the scenes. Throughout her life, she battled severe mental illness, including depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. She was one of the very few country artists of her generation who actually spoke openly about her mental health diagnosis. In many ways, that openness was brave. But talking about pain and escaping it are two completely different things. No matter how many interviews she gave or how many books she wrote about healing, Naomi continued to suffer deeply and privately for decades. In 1991, she was forced to step away from performing after being diagnosed with hepatitis C, a serious liver disease she reportedly contracted while working as a nurse. Her doctors told her she might only have a few years left to live. But Naomi defied those predictions. She entered remission, recovered, and eventually became a mental health advocate. It seemed like she had beaten yet another impossible challenge. And then, in early 2022, something happened that gave fans a reason to celebrate. Naomi and Wynonna announced a farewell tour, one final run of shows to honor their legacy together. People were excited, but those who were closest to Naomi say that in the weeks leading up to her death, she seemed overwhelmed, erratic, and emotionally exhausted in a way that worried the people around her. Nobody, however, was ready for what came next. Just one day before the Judds were supposed to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, one of the highest honors in country music, Naomi Judd was found dead inside her home. The autopsy report released by the Nashville Medical Examiner's Office confirmed the heartbreaking truth. Naomi Judd had taken her own life. But that was only the beginning of what the report revealed. The details that followed were disturbing in ways that no one had fully anticipated. According to the official report, Naomi was discovered at her home on the morning of April 30th, 2022. At precisely 10:57 a.m., emergency responders rushed her to Williamson Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead at 12:35 p.m. The very next day, she was supposed to stand beside Wynonna and accept one of the greatest honors of their careers. Instead, the world was learning the terrible truth about her final hours. The physical details in the report are clinical and hard to read, but they paint a picture that cannot be ignored. The wound was described as entering from the right side of her scalp, passing through both the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain, the parts responsible for decision-making and emotion, and exiting on the left side. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of another person being involved. The scene, investigators noted, was consistent with a self-directed act. She was dressed in white pants held together with a safety pin at the waist, a white shirt, and a blue robe. A blue bedsheet and pillow had been brought with her during transport to the hospital. Quiet, heartbreaking details that made the scene feel even more real. But some of the most surprising details in the report had nothing to do with how she died. They had to do with her body itself and what it revealed about the hidden pressures of living as a public figure. The report noted multiple past cosmetic procedures, including a visible scar stretching across her scalp from above the right ear to near the left temple, consistent with a surgical facelift. There were smaller scars near her eyes, suggesting eyelid surgery. Her eyebrows, lips, and hairline had been tattooed with permanent pigment, a technique sometimes used by celebrities to maintain a certain look even as they age or deal with hair thinning. She also had breast implants, a tummy tuck scar running from hip to hip, and scars on both knees that suggested additional procedures. Her nails were neatly manicured with French tip acrylics. Her toenails were painted soft pink. At first glance, this was the body of a performer who had taken great care to maintain her appearance right up until the very end. But what the report also found tells a very different kind of story. The toxicology results showed that Naomi had been taking a complicated and potentially dangerous combination of psychiatric and neurological medications at the time of her death. The substances found in her system included venlafaxine, which is a common antidepressant prescribed for major depression and mood disorders. There was also trazodone, another medication often used for depression and anxiety that can cause heavy sedation. Primidone, an anticonvulsant, was present, suggesting she may have had a history of seizures or was using it to help stabilize severe mood swings. Memantine was also found, and that one raised serious questions because memantine is a medication most commonly prescribed for Alzheimer's disease and other forms of cognitive decline. Its presence suggests Naomi may have been quietly dealing with early signs of memory problems in addition to everything else. And then there was a substance called MCPP, a psychoactive compound that can interact heavily with serotonin levels in the brain and has effects that can alter perception and emotional stability in significant ways. In plain terms, Naomi Judd was managing a complicated and potentially overwhelming mix of powerful medications, each of which can cause drowsiness, confusion, and emotional instability on their own. Together, according to medical experts, they can amplify feelings of despair to an extreme degree. This aligns directly with what people close to her had been observing in the weeks before her death. Multiple sources reported that she had been increasingly volatile, emotionally exhausted, and erratic. The announcement of the farewell tour and all the public attention that came with it may have placed enormous psychological pressure on a woman who was already struggling to hold herself together behind the scenes. And then there is the detail that perhaps shocked people the most. Found near her body was a handwritten note. While the full contents of that note have not been officially released to the public, it has been widely reported that the note contained personal reflections and pointed language, and that it was reportedly directed at her daughter, Wynonna. The exact nature of what was written remains unclear, but the very existence of such a note, addressed in the final moments of her life to the daughter she had spent decades performing alongside, raises questions that may never be fully answered. It shattered the image many fans had of their relationship. It suggested that whatever had been left unresolved between mother and daughter was still very much present in Naomi's heart at the very end. What makes this entire story so tragic is the timing. Naomi Judd was hours away from being inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. She was on the verge of being celebrated by the entire music world. A farewell tour had just been announced. From the outside, it looked like she was stepping into one of the brightest moments of her life. But inside, something very different was happening. The pressure of returning to public life, combined with her fragile mental health, a difficult mix of medications, and the weight of unresolved pain she had carried for decades, created a perfect storm that ultimately proved too much to survive. The disturbing details in that autopsy report are not just a medical record. They are a window into a life that was far more complicated and far more painful than the public ever truly understood. Naomi Judd was more than a country music legend. She was a woman who fought invisible battles every single day, who kept smiling when she was breaking, and who ultimately could not find her way through the darkness that had followed her for most of her life. Her story is a reminder that fame and success do not protect a person from suffering, and that behind every bright smile, there can be a pain that no camera ever fully captures. If you are someone who is struggling right now, please know that help is available. You are not alone. And if this video made you feel something today, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it. Because Naomi's story deserves to be told with the truth and care it has always deserved.